The Space Marines of the Emperor's Legiones Astartes were created as warriors shaped for war in body, mind, and soul, their forms enhanced and their thoughts guided, so that battle became their purpose and their nature. Each legion carried its own distinct character, shaped quietly by its gene seed and the traditions that grew around it, so that no two were ever truly alike in spirit or method. Among them, the Thousand Suns stood apart, drawn deeply into the study of hidden knowledge, their path bound to mysticism and the strange currents of psychic power that moved unseen through the galaxy. These arts made them formidable in ways others could not easily match, yet they also brought unease and suspicion from those who feared what they could not fully understand. In time, that unease would grow heavier until it reached the attention of the Emperor himself, and the weight of his judgment began to gather around them. Like the other legions, the warriors of the 15th were first formed upon Terra, their earliest recruits drawn from its people and shaped through the Emperor's design into something greater than human. Their gene seed came from the psychic essence of Magnus the Red, and it was placed within them in the gene laboratories of Luna during a brief stirring of warp activity that touched even the heart of the Sol system. This surge of unseen forces brought strange disturbances across the world, with outbreaks of violence that seemed to rise without warning, though it left no clear mark upon the gene seed itself. Years later, when Magnus would learn of these events, after taking command of his legion upon Prospero, he would regard them as troubling signs, quiet omens that lingered in memory. The first of the Legion's warriors had been chosen from those with psychic potential among the people of the old Achaemenid Empire, a region that had long stood under the Emperor's rule and had been spared much of the devastation that scarred other lands. From among these families, the Emperor himself selected those who would undergo the transformation, taking them from their homes to the hidden laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains, where his earliest experiments in human enhancement had begun. There, the young aspirants were remade, their bodies and minds altered as they took their first steps toward becoming Astartes, and among them were Heretek Ahriman and his twin brother Ormuzd. When their training was complete, the Legion was sent into the final struggles of Terra's unification, gaining experience against the last remnants of resistance that still lingered. After proving themselves in these early battles, they were given a name by the Emperor, the Thousand Suns, and granted their own fleet, so that they might carry their strength outward into the Great Crusade and take part in the long effort to reunite humanity among the stars. Prospero was once a world of emptiness and shadow, a distant place chosen by those who wished to remain unseen, where mutants and psychers could live apart from the fear and hatred that followed them elsewhere. In time, a single great city rose there, Tizca, its pale structures reaching upward in quiet defiance of the barren world around it, sustained by hidden systems and guided by a blend of technology and psychic craft. Within its shining towers, those who dwelled there gave themselves fully to the study of their abilities, seeking mastery over the powers that set them apart, and it was in this environment that Magnus grew, moving from student to adept, and then beyond, as his understanding deepened with each passing year. When he reached maturity, the one he had long foreseen finally came to him, and the Emperor arrived upon Prospero. The recognition between them was immediate, as though no time had passed at all, and the Emperor acknowledged Magnus as his son, granting him command of the legion that bore his genetic legacy. Through that connection, the warriors of the 15th carried within them a strong inclination towards psychic power, and many among them inherited abilities that echoed the strength of their Primarch, shaping the legion into something both remarkable and unsettling to those who observed them. Not long after the legion began its part in the Great Crusade, their psychic abilities emerged more strongly, revealing themselves in ways that seemed to draw them closer to the Emperor's own nature. Though this development was watched with caution by him and those closest to his rule. Despite that unease, these powers proved useful, and the Thousand Sons carried them into battle, shaping conflicts in ways that avoided the heavy losses often seen in direct assaults. They learned to bend the will of entire populations, guiding worlds into compliance without the need for destruction, though such methods earned them the disapproval of others, especially those who believed that honor lay in open battle. Yet beneath this success, something darker began to take hold, as a creeping mutation spread among the Legion, twisting bodies and minds into forms that no longer resembled what they had once been. This affliction, known among them as the flesh change, brought fear and sorrow as those affected were placed into stasis in the hope that a cure might one day be found, while the number of active warriors dwindled. When the Legion was reunited with Magnus upon Prospero, the crisis had grown severe, and after the Emperor's departure, the mutations surged beyond control until Magnus intervened, saving those he could through means not fully understood. In the end, only 1,000 warriors remained, but their gene seed was stabilized, and recruitment from Prospero allowed the Legion to slowly rebuild, though it would never reach the size of others. With their strength restored, they returned to the Crusade using their abilities to bring worlds into compliance through a mixture of insight and subtlety, though such methods became less effective as they moved into regions where enemies possessed powers of their own. During one such campaign on the world of Akoru, the Legion encountered a place shaped by ancient forces, where a constructed mountain held within it a network of pathways linking distant worlds, though this structure had been corrupted and sealed. In their exploration, imprisoned entities were released, taking control of towering guardians and turning them against the Thousand Sons, until they were defeated through the combined efforts of Magnus and allied forces. From there, the Legion moved toward the Archreach cluster, where conflict had already begun and where resistance to the Imperium remained strong. In these campaigns, they worked alongside other legions, bringing their unique abilities to bear in battles that ranged across multiple worlds, where strange creatures and determined defenders forced them to adapt and endure. In the final struggles upon the world known as Shrike, their foresight and precision helped locate hidden enemies, allowing allied forces to strike with decisive effect. And though the campaign was harsh, it ended with victory, shaped in part by the quiet influence of the Thousand Sons' psychic gifts. Even after victory had been secured, tensions between the Thousand Sons and the Space Wolves continued to rise, eventually breaking into open conflict during the battle for Phoenix Crag, where differences in belief and method could no longer be set aside. Magnus grew troubled by the destruction he witnessed, while his counterparts defended their actions as necessary, and the strain between them turned quickly into violence. As the two sides clashed, a sudden horror unfolded when one of the 1,000 Suns succumbed to the flesh change, his form twisting beyond recognition after the strain of his powers. In that moment of chaos, Magnus stepped forward with a gesture of mercy, only for the creature to be destroyed by a single shot fired by the Wolf King. The silence that followed carried a heavy weight, and though both legions stood ready to continue the conflict, it was halted by the intervention of another Primarch, whose words restored a fragile calm. Yet the divide remained, deepened further by a blood oath, sworn in anger, promising that this moment would not be forgotten. In the years that followed, voices rose against the 1,000 Suns across the Imperium, with many calling for their removal, as fear of psychic power spread among those who had seen its dangers during the long wars of the Crusade. The Emperor, already wary, called for a great council upon the distant world of Nicaea, where the matter would be decided in the presence of the highest authorities. There, Magnus spoke in defense of his legion and the value of their abilities, while others argued that such powers brought only risk and corruption, and when the decision was made, it brought a heavy change. The use of psychic abilities within the military was forbidden, and the librarians of the legions were ordered to disband, their knowledge set aside. For the 1,000 Suns, this decree struck at the heart of what they had become. Yet even as they outwardly complied, they continued to gather and preserve the knowledge they had found, compiling it into a single work that would come to be known as the Book of Magnus, a quiet defiance carried forward in silence. When Magnus the Red came to understand that Horus had turned away from the Imperium and given himself to darker powers, he reached out across the void with his own mind, forcing a message into the Imperial Palace on Terra. And in doing so, he shattered its psychic defenses, then brought death to countless souls who could not endure the weight of his call. The Emperor did not accept what was revealed, and instead saw only the familiar pattern of Magnus turning again to forbidden sorcery, believing that it was his son who had fallen rather than Horus, and so he commanded that Magnus be brought to Terra to answer for his actions. Yet that command was twisted before it could be fulfilled, as Horus altered the message meant for the Space Wolves, and what had been an order to bring Magnus back became a call to strike at his world. Magnus had already seen what was coming, not as a sudden surprise, but as something inevitable. In a quiet act of resignation, he concealed the truth from his own legion, veiling the planet in silence and scattering his fleet so that no warning could be given, even though he understood the cost of such a choice. The attack came without hesitation, the invading forces arriving almost upon Prospero itself, breaking its defenses and beginning a campaign that would be remembered as the Fall of Prospero. Fire rained from orbit, and much of the world was reduced to ash, though the city of Tisca endured beneath a psychic shield that Magnus allowed to remain, knowing that its removal would reveal too much. And so the war descended upon its streets as Imperial forces landed and began their advance. Though Magnus had accepted what was to come, his legion did not share that surrender, and they fought back with determination as the city became a place of fire and ruin, holding their ground for a time before being driven back step by step. At last, Magnus himself entered the battle when the final defenses were threatened, and there he faced Leman Russ in a clash that ended in his defeat, forcing him to open a path through the warp and flee to a place prepared by Sinch, where he would be changed forever. In the long years that followed, the hatred between the Thousand Sons and the Space Wolves endured, shaping conflicts that stretched across worlds, where temples were raised in secret, relics were stolen for dark rituals, and battles were fought again and again as each side sought to undo the other, even when victory came at a cost that could not be reclaimed. Time passed into distant centuries before the desire for vengeance returned in force, and the Thousand Sons began to strike at worlds near Fenris, drawing attention and spreading fear as they attempted to pull their enemies away from their stronghold. Magnus reached even into the dreams of Heretek Ironhelm, showing him visions of destruction that lingered long after waking, guiding him toward a confrontation he believed he had chosen. Heretek eventually committed his forces against what he thought was the enemy's hidden base, leaving Fenris exposed. And in that moment, the Thousand Sons turned their attention to the heart of the Space Wolves. The assault upon the Fang endured for many days and nights, pressing the defenders into retreat and forcing them to awaken Bjorn, who had long endured as a silent guardian within a dreadnought shell. The fighting drew inward, deeper into the stronghold as messengers were sent to recall Heretek, and when he returned, he brought the battle directly to Magnus himself. The confrontation was brief and decisive, for Magnus in his transformed state was beyond him, and though Heretek struck true and left a lasting wound, he was slain upon the slopes of the Fang before the conflict could turn. When the Space Wolves' fleet finally returned, the Thousand Sons withdrew into the warp, satisfied with what they had achieved, leaving behind the silence of loss and the echo of a victory that did not end the conflict but only carried it forward into the future. In the time that followed their exile, the Thousand Sons found that the affliction that had once threatened them had not been left behind, and the slow corruption of their forms returned with renewed force as the influence of the warp shaped their bodies into something unstable and uncertain. The gifts of Sinch were not gentle, and many of the Legion began to lose themselves, their forms twisting into mindless shapes that no longer held reason or memory. Ahriman had long carried the burden of this curse, having seen its effects even before their fall, and when he witnessed those closest to him succumb to it, his resolve hardened into something that could not be set aside. He devoted himself entirely to finding a solution, and though others doubted him, he continued until at last he believed he had found a way to end the cycle of mutation. When Magnus had ascended to his new state, the remaining sorcerers gathered and agreed to act together, forming a cabal and preparing the ritual that would change everything. The spell was unleashed with overwhelming force, lightning striking every member of the Legion, and in that moment, those without psychic strength were reduced to ash within their armor, leaving behind only hollow shells. Those who possessed such power were not destroyed, but instead transformed, their abilities magnified, while their souls became bound to their armor, creating beings that endured without flesh, caught between life and something that could no longer truly be called it. The consequences of that act did not pass without judgment, and Magnus, seeing what had been done to his legion, prepared to destroy Ahriman and those who had followed him, his anger rising to a point that could not be ignored. Yet before that final act could be carried out, Sinch intervened, revealing that the pieces upon the board were not so easily discarded. Instead of destruction, exile was given, and Ahriman was cast out to wander without rest, carrying both the burden of his actions and the knowledge he had gained. Magnus placed a curse upon him, sending him into a path that would lead him through the galaxy in search of meaning, though the path he followed was one of gathering power rather than understanding. Across many worlds, Ahriman sought out artifacts and those who could wield psychic force, drawing them into his influence and adding to the reach of chaos. And his actions became so significant that even the Inquisition chose to destroy what was valuable rather than allow it to fall into his hands. Since the casting of his great spell, Ahriman has continued his search, driven by the belief that what he has done can still be undone, and that somewhere within the hidden knowledge of the galaxy lies the answer he seeks. His path has led him toward the Black Library of the Eldar, a place where the accumulated understanding of chaos is guarded and kept beyond reach. During a great conflict, he found a way to enter the hidden paths of the Webway, using both a captured Inquisitor and an ancient portal to reach deeper into that labyrinth, where he pressed forward despite the dangers that watched and waited. Though he could not fully claim what he sought, he came close enough to project himself within, gathering knowledge from a forbidden text and committing it to his own records. Even as he was forced out by the chaos he unleashed, including the summoning of a vast warp creature that tore through both realms, he did not leave empty-handed, and the knowledge he carried allowed him to navigate those hidden pathways once more. Through this, he gained access to routes that reach even to Fenris, tying his actions again to the long conflict with the Space Wolves, while also strengthening his place within Magnus's designs. Though he believes he acts by his own will, seeking control over forces that others cannot master, his actions continue to serve the greater design of Sinch, whether he acknowledges it or not, and so his journey continues without rest, shaped by a purpose that remains just beyond his grasp. Before they stood beside their Primarch, the warriors of the Legion wore armor in muted ochre tones, colors that carried the memory of the immortal regiments once raised by an ancient empire of old Earth, from which many of their earliest recruits had come. There is a sense of distance in that origin, as if the dust of that forgotten land still lingered upon their armor, quiet and unchanging as the years passed. When they were finally united with Magnus and brought to Prospero, the tone of the Legion shifted and their armor became red, chosen in quiet honor of their Primarch, whose own skin bore that same deep crimson hue. The color did not simply mark allegiance, but seemed to reflect a shared identity, something that settled across the Legion as naturally as breath, After the long shadow of the heresy, their appearance changed once more, and blue and yellow became the livery of those who now served Sinch, though no single form remained fixed among them. Some wore shades of azure and gold that shimmered faintly in the light, while others layered additional colors into their armor, shaping personal heraldry that spoke of individual paths rather than a single unified design. Among these variations, many began to wear elaborate crests upon their helmets, forms reminiscent of the striped Nemes crowns of ancient pharaohs, rising upward in quiet ceremonial lines. These adornments seemed to mark something deeper than ornamentation, perhaps a silent sign of those touched by the Rubric of Ahriman, though the meaning was carried without words. In their earliest form, the Legion's armor and markings stood in stark contrast to what they would later become, drawing from the echoes of ancient techno-barbarian cultures and bearing a symbol centered above a lapis blue letter, shaped as an ancient numeral that represented 1,000. That symbol carried both the name of the Legion and the memory of their first number, those initial warriors chosen with care by the Emperor himself. That same number would later hold another meaning, reflecting those who survived the terrible affliction of the flesh change after Magnus found a way to spare his sons, though in time their ranks grew far beyond that original count, as new warriors were brought into the Legion during the Great Crusade. Their strength expanded steadily, eventually reaching tens of thousands, even as the memory of those early losses lingered beneath the surface. When Magnus took command and led them to Prospero, the Legion's badge changed into a solar glyph, a symbol that became their defining icon and would later shape the more elaborate forms seen after their fall. The transformation did not end there, and after the heresy their imagery shifted again into the Ouroboros, a serpent devouring its own tail, a symbol that spoke quietly of cycles without beginning or end, of constant renewal and return. Across their armor, sect symbols claimed one shoulder, while the other bore the mark of the Legion, each sigil layered with meaning, legible only to those who knew their language. The flaming worm, reshaped from their earlier icon, recurred without end, a constant amid endless variation, while runic clusters and framing designs spoke of thrall bands, squads, and even individual warriors to those with the sight to read them. The symbols carried by the Legion extend beyond simple markings, forming a language of runes and icons tied closely to the will of Sinch, and often shaped into forms that represent numbers from 1 through 10. These signs are inscribed with care by sorceress masters, using inks drawn from rare and potent materials, and each mark settles onto the tabards of the rubricae as a quiet identifier of their place within a thrall band. Each warrior bears these runes in varying forms, some simple and clear, others layered with additional symbols that speak of enchantments, curses, or even the lingering presence of a name carried within the spirit. The same patterns appear among the scarab occult terminators, linking them to their thrall bands, while sorcerers mark their chosen servants with subtle signs upon their armor, creating bonds that are visible only to those who understand their meaning. The shapes of these symbols reach back to the scholars of Tisca, where complex geometric designs once held clear and peaceful meanings, though over time their intent has shifted into something darker. A symbol that once spoke of sunrise may now carry the weight of a killing flame, its form unchanged while its purpose has quietly transformed. Beneath all of this lies the Dark Tongue, a ritual language spoken in the patterns of runes, the only true way to express the deeper mysteries of chaos. It is a language shared with demons and other entities, and the Legion studies it carefully, using its forms to summon and bargain with the beings that answer their calls. Even their machines carry these markings etched into metal and bound with purpose, sometimes reflecting the heraldry of those within, and sometimes serving as vessels that hold trapped entities within their structure. These vehicles move with a presence that feels almost alive, driven forward with a force that seeks to crush and break whatever stands before them, as though guided by something more than simple machinery. Magnus was remembered as the most deeply altered among the Emperor's sons, his form shaped not only in flesh but in mind, and this quiet distortion carried into those who bore his gene seed. Many among the 1,000 sons found within themselves a natural stirring of psychic awareness that set them apart from their brethren. In the early years, there were already signs that something within them did not rest easily, as a small yet notable number began to show changes of the body, subtle at first, but never entirely absent. And this undercurrent of mutation lingered as a quiet truth within the Legion. When they fell fully under the influence of Sinch, that restrained presence gave way, and the spread of mutation grew uncontrolled, no longer contained to a few, but becoming a defining aspect of their existence, altering them in ways that could not be ignored or undone. The rubric brought an end to that relentless transformation for the Battle Brothers, stilling the chaos within them and leaving behind only silent armored shells. Yet those who command these forms remain bound to the same origin, carrying the gene seed of their daemon prince. These sorcerers, unchanged in that deeper sense, bear their altered forms without hesitation, their grotesque features not hidden, but displayed as marks of favor, offered by a patron whose nature is as shifting and mercurial as the changes it bestows. Prospero was once chosen for its distance from everything else, a place set far from the common paths of travel, where little of value could be found, and where those who came there believed they might remain unseen for a very long time. It offered quiet isolation rather than prosperity, and that single promise was enough, even if it meant living on a world that could give almost nothing in return. In the end, even that fragile safety did not last, and what remains now is only a blasted ruin, its fate sealed and named Purgatus by those who passed judgment upon it. Over long ages of ceaseless raiding, it became clear that something of the old world endured, as the City of Light did not vanish, but instead passed through the Immaterium and emerged whole in another place. It came to rest within the Eye of Terror, settling upon a world that would come to be known as the Planet of the Sorcerers, where the air itself seems thick with power and the ground trembles with restless force. Across its surface, that power reveals itself in burning flows of lava and in skies that churn with storms heavy with magical vapor, creating a landscape that feels alive in a way that is never calm. From those molten plains, jagged rock rises upward in harsh formations, and upon them stand twisted towers that echo the shapes of ancient spires and pyramids, though they now appear distorted and unnatural, as if memory itself had been reshaped into something darker. Among these structures, one stands above all others, an immense obsidian monolith known as the Tower of the Cyclops, so vast that it can be seen even from the void beyond the world. At its highest point, there is a single glowing eye of warp energy, and through that unblinking gaze, Magnus watches what lies ahead, as though the future itself were something to be observed from a great distance. The silver towers that once belonged to the City of Light have also changed, drawn into new forms by the will and power of the Thousand Suns, until they became vast fortresses capable of moving through space itself. From within these towering vessels, Psyker lords depart from the planet of the sorcerers and carry their intent across the stars, setting out again and again to strike against the Imperium of Man in acts of measured and enduring vengeance. The Thousand Suns were never drawn to the closeness of battle, and instead they moved with careful intent, shaping their actions through strategy and the quiet strength of their psychic abilities, allowing each engagement to unfold as something guided rather than forced. There was a sense of distance in the way they fought, as if each step had already been considered long before the moment arrived, and their reliance on deception and subtle control became a defining part of how they were known. This approach did not go without judgment, and voices like that of Lemon Russ spoke against them, holding firmly to the belief that strength and courage alone should decide the outcome of any battle, while anything else carried a shadow of dishonor. Even so, Magnus trusted deeply in those he had taught, shaping officers who could move and decide without his presence, and in that trust, the Legion found a kind of independence that allowed it to function with quiet efficiency, even when its Primarch was far removed. After the casting of the Rubric of Ahriman, there was a shift that settled over their methods, not sudden but steady, as they adjusted to what the spell had left behind. And from that point forward, their forces began to rely more heavily on those who could still wield power. Sorcerers and aspiring sorcerers took their place at the forefront, guiding formations of Rubric Marines who advanced without haste and without pause, moving forward with a slow and unrelenting certainty that carried the weight of what they had become. Those who reach into the shifting currents of change do so with a quiet understanding that they are touching something vast and unstable, something that brushes against the very essence that empowers Sinch himself. As they draw upon these forces, there is a constant sense of strain, as if the mind must stretch beyond its natural limits while holding itself together at the same time. The energies they wield carry both madness and transformation, flowing outward to bless allies with unnatural gifts, while at the same time twisting enemies into broken shapes that can barely be recognized. There is a strange balance in this exchange, where power is granted freely to those who impress the great architect of fate, yet never without consequence. Each act of sorcery leaves a trace, a subtle weight that lingers in the mind and body, reminding the wielder that nothing drawn from the warp is ever truly given without taking something in return. Within the discipline devoted to change, the sorcerer shapes the battlefield with movements that feel almost effortless, as if guided by unseen currents that respond to thought alone. A storm of pink and blue fire may gather in the air, swirling and twisting as it descends upon the enemy, leaving behind warped remnants that claw and bite, as if life itself had been reshaped in passing. In quieter moments, the same power is turned inward or upon chosen allies, where flesh bends and reforms under unseen pressure, guided towards some new and uncertain destiny. There are times when the sorcerer releases raw warp energy in a focused surge, sending it crashing outward in a violent burst that tears through bodies and scatters forms across the ground, leaving behind shapes that no longer belong to the world they came from. At other moments, the sorcerer draws in the invisible currents of magic that swirl around the battlefield, speaking in reverse tones that seem to pull strength from every nearby manifestation, gathering it into something greater and more controlled. A breath may carry a cloud of mutating force that softens form and substance until it runs like wax, while a shouted invocation can unravel the structure of a body entirely, leaving only a distorted echo of what once stood there. Minds, too, are not spared, as whispers slip into thought and turn allies against one another, leaving behind a quiet horror once clarity returns. And when the gaze of a being like Magnus falls upon a target, it is not merely seen, but unmade, as if existence itself has been withdrawn. Yet not all within this discipline is destruction, as perception itself can be bent and blurred until allies move unseen, their forms slipping past notice as though wrapped in shifting light. Time can also be softened and stretched, creating small pockets where wounds close and strength returns at an unnatural pace, while those who read the threads of fate move with a certainty that makes every motion seem preordained. The Sinistrum path feels heavier, as though it draws from deeper wells of emotion and intent, shaping the warp through force of will rather than subtle manipulation. A sphere of dark energy may gather in the sorcerer's grasp, humming with contained fury before it is cast forward, striking with a weight that seems far greater than its size would suggest. In these moments, the sorcerer does not merely use power, but imposes it upon the world with unmistakable intent. There are times when the veil of reality is pulled aside, allowing the sorcerer to grasp the strands of fate itself, bending and twisting them into new patterns that favor his own designs. The act feels deliberate and precise, as if each motion carries consequence, reshaping outcomes that have not yet come to pass. At the same time, the sorcerer may turn inward, drawing upon a deep reservoir of hatred, forming it into a jagged barrier that resists incoming force with a quiet, unyielding presence. Strength may surge through the body in sudden waves, swelling muscle and sinew until even the heaviest constructs seem fragile by comparison, while the presence of a psychic foe can be laid bare, stripped of protection and exposed to the attention of hungry entities drawn by the disturbance. When a curse is spoken, It does not simply linger, but actively strips away the layers of defense that shield the enemy, leaving them open to whatever follows next. The Heretek Discipline turns its attention toward machines, treating them not as inert constructs, but as entities that can be influenced, subverted, and reshaped through the same currents that affect flesh and mind. A sorcerer may reach into the unseen presence within a war engine, disrupting its inner workings as though introducing a sickness that spreads through circuits and systems, reversing functions and bending purpose away from its original design. At times, the warp itself is drawn into a vehicle, filling it with erratic vitality as unseen creatures slip into its structure, lending it a restless and unnatural energy that drives it forward with renewed force. In contrast, a torrent of corrupted code may be unleashed in a violent outpouring, overwhelming systems and pushing the machine's inner spirit toward instability until it begins to falter under the strain. There is also a quieter form of intervention, where damaged constructs are infused with fresh energy, their broken parts forced back into function through sheer imposition of will. Flesh and metal may blend under the sorcerer's touch, forming a hardened layer that protects against harm while retaining a disturbing sense of movement beneath the surface. And when the sorcerer chooses to end a machine's function entirely, unseen tendrils may coil around its core, tightening slowly until the life within it is extinguished. In some moments, the warp itself manifests as a storm of decay, sweeping across armored hulls and tearing fragments free, hurling them back with violent force as if the very structure of the machine is being undone and repurposed in the same motion. The ectomantic arts move between the visible and the unseen, drawing upon energies that seem to hover just beyond the edge of perception, waiting to be called into form. The simple gesture may cause power to surge along the sorcerer's limbs before bursting outward in a sudden release, overwhelming anything caught within its reach. At other times, the air itself is charged, forming a barrier that hums softly as it deflects incoming force at a level too fine to be easily understood. Sound becomes a weapon in this discipline, as a piercing cry can ripple through the environment, disrupting machinery and causing systems to fail under the strain of its unnatural frequency. Fire drawn from the warp may gather around the sorcerer, building in intensity before being cast outward in a sweeping wave that consumes and continues, passing from one target to another with a relentless, searching motion. Some manifestations feel almost alive, as claws of energy coil around the arms and release bursts of force with each strike. At the same time, shapes from beyond drift into view, carrying allies across the battlefield in movements that are swift and unsettling. In the most disorienting moments, the sorcerer draws in the essence of those nearby and exchanges their positions through the unseen medium of the warp. Bodies and souls shift and realign, as though space itself has been quietly folded and reset. The Geomortis Discipline draws its strength from the world beneath the sorcerer's feet, reaching into the substance of the land and reshaping it with deliberate, often violent intent. A spoken curse can cause the ground to split and rise, forming jagged shapes that open like a maw, pulling enemies downward into shifting layers of stone and soil that do not easily release what they claim. Energy may also be drawn from the world itself, siphoned in a steady flow that weakens the land while strengthening those aligned with the sorcerer, creating a subtle exchange where vitality is redistributed rather than simply created. There are moments when pressure builds unseen beneath the surface, gathering until the ground can no longer contain it. Then when it breaks, it does so with force, sending molten material and scalding vapor outward in a destructive surge. The sorcerer may press deeper into the structure of the world, causing it to twist and buckle as if it could feel pain. His presence becomes charged with unnatural force, and the surrounding environment seems to recoil, shifting aside rather than endure contact. Walls and fortifications lose their stability under this influence, crumbling as though their foundations have been quietly undone. In its most extreme form, this discipline tears at the very bedrock, lifting fragments of the world into the air before casting them down again, reshaping the battlefield in broad, sweeping motions that leave little of the original landscape intact. The Dark Hereticus discipline expresses power more directly, as the sorcerer channels energy through the body and releases it in ways that are immediate and difficult to resist. A focused gaze can send streams of destructive force outward, burning through anything in their path and leaving behind surfaces that are melted and reshaped by the intensity. There are moments when a simple invocation strips away the protections that surround an enemy, causing shields and wards to fail quietly, leaving them exposed without warning. The same currents of power can be directed into a living form, where bone and flesh are reshaped under pressure, transforming the subject into something entirely different as the process unfolds. Clarity of sight also plays a role, as the sorcerer may guide the actions of allies with subtle influence, allowing their strikes to land with greater certainty, while strength can be bestowed in sudden surges that elevate physical capability beyond natural limits. Time itself becomes flexible under this discipline, stretching just enough to allow movement and action to accelerate, giving allies a fleeting but decisive advantage in the flow of battle. The discipline devoted fully to cinch carries a sense of constant transformation, where nothing remains fixed for long and every action leads to another change yet to come. Under its influence, those who serve begin to shift and evolve, their forms bending to match the will that guides them, as if the act of becoming something new is both inevitable and desired. A surge of warp energy can be released in a focused strike, bringing uncontrollable mutation that reshapes the target in unpredictable ways. At the same time, the sorcerer's awareness of future paths allows him to move along the one that leads most directly to victory. Thought itself becomes a tool of control, slipping into the minds of others and turning them against their own allies. When the influence fades, it leaves confusion and regret behind. Flames of unnatural color may gather around followers, flickering and spreading outward to consume whatever stands before them, while at the height of this power, a tear can be opened in the fabric of reality itself. Through that opening, the pull of the warp becomes impossible to resist, drawing those nearby into its depths, where their fate is sealed beyond the reach of the material world. The weapons of the Thousand Suns feel shaped as much by unseen will as by careful craft, their artificers and sorcerers leaving a quiet mark upon every surface and mechanism that rests in their grasp. When their guns finally stir and speak, the sound carries more than simple violence, for each shot releases explosive bolts that tear through flesh while something stranger moves alongside them. A current of arcane energy that seeps into the impact and can soften even ceramite as though it were yielding to heat and memory at once. In this way, the long war continues without pause, carried forward through weapons that do not rely on force alone, but on something deeper and less certain. Among these instruments, there are familiar forms that echo across battlefields, from pistols held close to the hand to heavier guns borne with measured steadiness, each shaped into inferno variants that carry the same quiet distortion within their fire. Alongside them, the Soul Reaper cannon hums with a heavier presence. Its roll is hurried, yet no less touched by that same unseen influence that lingers in every discharge. Resting upon the shoulders of Sekhmet's Scarab occult terminators, the Hellfire missile rack waits with a still patience, its compact warheads held in place until the moment they are called to motion. When they release, the sky itself seems to catch a brief reflection of their passing, and their detonation unfolds in bursts of etheric light that feel both brilliant and distant, as though the explosion belongs partly to another place. There are also weapons that carry flame, though the fire they cast is never quite ordinary. It shifts and twists as it moves, touching those it reaches with a change that is not easily undone. In the hands of the Thousand Suns, these warp flame weapons release streams of burning light that alter as much as they consume. Whether in smaller forms or heavier instruments, each leaves behind a quiet trace of transformation rather than simple ruin. The Icon of Flame stands with a steady presence, its surface alive with coruscating energies that seem to move in slow, restless patterns, never settling into stillness for long. Those who gather near it feel their weapons touched by this quiet radiance, as if the very act of devotion draws the shifting energy closer, wrapping steel and mechanism alike in a mantle of mutagenic fire. There is no sudden surge or violent change, only a gradual suffusion, a subtle layering of power that lingers around each blade and barrel, shaping them into something slightly altered, yet unmistakably bound to the same source. The Ether Fire Cannon emerged as a later creation, formed through the combined efforts of Pirate cult Techmarine artificers. They worked with a careful balance of knowledge and restraint, blending modified plasma designs with the quiet influence of occult lore. In its construction, the presence of the forge world of Zhao Arkad can be felt. Its unique techno-arcana is woven into the weapon's function, so that each discharge carries more than simple heat, but a deeper resonance shaped by both craft and hidden understanding. Alongside such creations, there existed munitions of a different nature, shells treated with a psycho-reactive toxin whose origins remain uncertain, yet whose effect proved both unusual and lethal in equal measure. These these asphyx shells found their place among the elites, though their story reaches back to earlier attempts on Prospero, where more primitive weapons were shaped in response to the threat of the Psychne Uin. Even then, their use remained limited, for the difficulty of producing them in greater number and extending their effect beyond narrow conditions kept them from wider deployment, leaving them as tools of rare and measured application rather than common instruments of war. For Magnus, knowledge was not simply a tool to be used, but something deeper that seemed to shape his every thought as he moved with quiet certainty through mysteries he believed were always within his reach. He held to the idea that no discipline could resist his understanding, and that no secret, however distant or hidden, would remain beyond his grasp once he turned his attention toward it. Among the thousand suns, this belief settled into something shared and constant, as though each warrior carried the same quiet conviction that knowledge itself might offer salvation. They treated every book with care, every fragment of writing with patience, and every document as something that could be slowly drawn from, until nothing remained hidden within it. There was a sense that all of it led somewhere, towards something greater that could be understood if only enough was uncovered. And so sorcery came to be seen not as a danger, but as the final step along that path. It was regarded as a kind of enlightenment, a way to touch the deeper workings of the universe without hesitation or doubt. Before the heresy, they appeared steady and loyal in the eyes of others, speaking the expected words and offering their oaths with calm assurance, while their voices joined in the hymns that praised the Emperor and his expanding realm. They fought with discipline and purpose, giving little outward sign that anything within them stood apart from those they fought beside. Yet beneath that surface, their devotion followed a quieter line, one that led not toward the Emperor, but toward their Primarch, whose vision guided them more completely than any distant authority ever could. When his reach extended beyond what could be safely held, and the pursuit of mastery carried him further than even he could control, there was no space left to turn away. Singe was already there, waiting within that moment of overreach, and those who had shaped themselves around Magnus found they could not stand apart from his fall, but instead followed him into it, as though the path had always been leading there. For 10 millennia, the thousand suns have walked the long and unbroken path of war against the Imperium, and across that vast stretch of time, relics of great and unsettling power have been gathered, shaped, or drawn forth from hidden places by the will of the sons of Magnus. Those artifacts most attuned to the designs of the great architect are kept within the echoing halls of Disca, where their presence lingers like a distant hum, and they are carried into battle only when the shifting strands of fate seem to demand it. Among these relics rests the astral grimoire, a dome filled with the quiet pull of distant stars, its surface marked by constellations and cosmic diagrams so potent that it must be bound in chains, lest it drift free as though caught in orbit around its bearer. In the hands of one who understands its nature, the weight of the world loosens, and the ordinary grip of gravity fades, allowing movement that feels unbound and almost effortless. The The Athenian scrolls carry echoes of knowledge that survived the fall of a great repository. Their sanctified pages preserve disciplines that once flourished in a place now long lost. Through them, a wielder can shape psychic power with such refinement that resistance becomes faint and uncertain. There is a sense in their presence of something remembered rather than learned. It feels as though fragments of a vanished age still linger within the ink. Crusader is spoken of with a quiet reverence, a weapon whose history stretches back to the time of the Horus Heresy, and whose demonic spirit stirs with a restless hunger that feeds upon the fractures within the Imperium. When it is brought to bear, it does not fire simple bolts, but spiraling strands of searing energy that tear through flesh and leave wounds that continue to burn and glimmer as if the damage itself refuses to fade. The dark matter crystal holds within it a fragment of absence, drawn from the place where Mangle once existed and shaped by the workings of a cabal into something that bends the fabric of space and time. Those who command it may open a passage where none should exist, stepping through a fleeting distortion that closes as quietly as it appeared. There are relics that alter perception rather than space, and the helm of the third eye carries a crystalline form that reflects more than simple sight, allowing its wearer to sense intent before action takes shape, as though moments are revealed just before they fully arrive. In a similar way, the Brimsodic staff weaves confusion into the battlefield, its rune-bound form giving rise to shifting duplicates that blur the line between presence and illusion. Seer's Bane carries a different weight, its creation bound to curses and to the imprisoned essence of a disgraced being, and it moves with a purpose that seems to reach beyond the physical, cutting not only through flesh but through thought itself. It is said to turn against those who rely too heavily on knowledge, as if it seeks to unravel certainty wherever it finds it. And there is the staff of arcane compulsion, shaped for control rather than deception, its power once used to hold back crowds that pressed too close, and now turned outward upon the battlefield, where a simple motion can push back advancing foes. In those moments, the space it creates becomes a quiet pause amid the noise of war, where even a brief delay may shift the outcome between survival and loss. Before the coming of Magnus the Red, the structure of the Legion is uncertain, though it is remembered that they followed patterns not far removed from other legions. Apart from the quiet but ever-present truth that many among them possessed psychic ability, and that this gift shaped them in ways others could not fully understand. When Magnus assumed command, he reshaped the Legion with deliberate care, introducing layers of hierarchy that reflected both command and knowledge, as if each rank carried not only authority, but also meaning drawn from deeper teachings. Within this design, sergeants guided their warriors in small formations known as chantries, while lieutenants and captains oversaw larger bodies called circles, their roles shifting naturally between command and guidance as circumstances required. Above them stood consuls and praetors, each entrusted with one of the fellowships, which together formed the whole of the Legion, bound not only by structure but by a philosophy that intertwined rank, purpose, and psychic discipline into a single living system. Magnus wove into this structure a more subtle order, where ranks overlapped and responsibilities intertwined, so that no single line of authority stood alone, and every officer carried multiple roles shaped by fellowship, order, and cult. When the Legion rebuilt itself after its losses, the number of its fellowships settled at 9, forming a structure known as the Pesed Jet, while alongside it existed the Rahati, a more elusive path of authority, where influence was measured not only by rank, but by psychic strength and presence within the Legion. It was expected that captains would leave their legion for a time, walking among other legions to learn their ways. In doing so, they carried back not only knowledge, but also stories of distant battles and unfamiliar brothers, shared in quiet recollection. These experiences shaped them into leaders capable of acting with independence, guided by their own understanding rather than constant oversight. This independence became a defining trait of the Legion's campaigns. Leadership among smaller units often fell to those with the strongest psychic promise, individuals known as thrall wizards, who learned both command and sorcery together, growing into figures who could guide others while deepening their own abilities. Because of this, the Legion rarely gathered in overwhelming numbers, instead moving in smaller forces led by sorcerers who carried both authority and experience, their decisions shaped by knowledge as much as by command. Among the most trusted stood the Rahati, the inner circle of advisors who remained close to Magnus, their place within that circle shifting with time and standing, while each sought to draw closer to his presence, knowing that such closeness brought greater power. Alongside them moved the Scarab Occult, warriors of the First Fellowship, clad in crimson armor and bound by discipline, so complete that their actions seemed almost beyond hesitation. Their will aligned so fully with command that even other Primarchs observed them with a mixture of curiosity and unease. The Legion also divided itself into cults, placing each warrior according to their psychic nature, so that every path of knowledge could be explored and refined. While not all developed these abilities, most found within themselves some echo of the power that defined their Primarch. In this way, the Legion became not just an army, but a gathering of minds. Each was shaped by its own discipline, yet all were bound together in a shared pursuit of understanding. Within the Legion, each warrior found a place within one of the cults, not determined by rank or fellowship, but by the nature of their psychic ability, so that across every formation there existed a quiet mixture of disciplines. Though at times one path might come to dominate a single fellowship, shaping its character in subtle ways. These cults had been founded by the earliest companions of Magnus, each mastering a different aspect of psychic power, and together they formed a system through which knowledge could be deepened and refined. On Prospero, in the city of Tisca, each cult raised its own great pyramid, structures that stood not only as repositories of knowledge, but as places of learning, where those gifted in a particular discipline could develop their abilities further, surrounded by symbols that reflected their chosen path. Most of these pyramids bore golden icons above their gates, though one stood apart, crowned with an ever-burning flame and guarded by a great engine of war, a presence that hinted at both power and vigilance. Those who walked the path of telepathy became voices and listeners within the Legion, shaping communication and guiding decisions through the quiet exchange of thought. Others who studied the currents of the future sought to glimpse what lay ahead, offering guidance that balanced possibility with caution. Some turned inward, mastering the body itself and altering its limits, using that knowledge both to heal and to destroy. Others drew upon fire, shaping it as both weapon and shield, their control extending even to the machines of war that moved alongside them. There were also those who shaped the unseen forces of the world, lifting and tearing with invisible strength, or raising barriers that could hold back destruction for a time. Though such efforts carried a heavy toll when sustained against overwhelming force. During the assault upon their home, these warriors joined their strength together to shield the city, their combined will forming a barrier that held until the strain became too great, and one by one they faltered under its weight. Each cult carried its own identity, marked upon armor and symbol, yet all were bound by a shared purpose, a constant pursuit of understanding that drew them deeper into the mysteries they sought to master, even as the balance between power and control shifted with the tides of the unseen. Beyond the visible structures of the Legion, there existed more secretive groups, their presence known only in fragments and quiet references. Among them were those who worked in shadow, carrying out tasks that required precision and silence, refining their psychic abilities not for display, but for the careful and deliberate taking of life. These individuals moved unseen, their methods varied yet unified by purpose. Each action was guided by a power that combined subtle foresight, control, and intent into a single decisive moment. Others took a different path, forming tightly bound groups of warriors whose mastery of blade and mind became indistinguishable, their movements flowing together as if guided by a single will. Their weapons shaped with care and marked by symbols that held meaning known only to their wielders. In battle, they moved with a unity that blurred the line between individual and collective, their presence calm yet unmistakably precise. Alongside these groups stood the Red Orders, structures that extended across the Legion, touching many aspects of its function without being bound to any single part of it. Their purpose lying not in direct combat, but in shaping the broader conduct of war and the Legion's place within the Imperium. Among them were those who studied patterns and numbers, guiding the placement of forces and the use of weapons with a precision that seemed almost beyond comprehension, their influence reaching even into the maintenance of war machines and the alliances that sustained them. There were also those who carried the memory of the Legion, tending to the fallen and guiding the selection of those who would join its ranks, their role spanning both past and future, while others worked in deeper secrecy, gathering knowledge through methods that blurred the line between awareness and control, their actions leaving little trace beyond the results they achieved. Supporting all of this were the forces raised from Prospero itself, soldiers who stood ready to defend their world and accompany the Legion in its campaigns. Their numbers and training placed them among the more capable forces of the Imperium, though in the end they would face a fate bound to the fall of their home. The defense of Prospero rested not only with the Legion, but also with the forces drawn from its people, among them the Spire Guard, who stood as the primary shield of their world, their discipline and equipment placing them among the finest soldiers of their kind. Some endured the early moments of the conflict and were carried away alongside their legion, though what became of them afterward remains uncertain, their fate lost beyond the veil of time. Above the city, the air forces launched their craft into the sky, their movements swift and deliberate as they engaged the enemy in the open air, their weapons casting light and fire as they fought for control of the space above Tizca. Though the struggle ended in their destruction as the battle intensified beyond recovery. On the ground, other regiments held their positions, including those stationed along the high structures overlooking the city, where they faced an assault so sudden and overwhelming that they were overcome almost immediately. Elsewhere, soldiers defended the older districts of the city, holding back the first waves of attack as long as they could, while others regrouped after devastating losses caused by bombardment, gathering what strength remained to continue the defense. Even as the outcome became increasingly certain, beyond the city itself, mechanized forces and towering engines of war remained within their own enclave, separated from the main battle yet part of the wider defense, their presence a reminder of the alliances that had once supported the Legion. In theory, the population of the city could have been raised in vast numbers to resist the invasion, but without training or leadership, such a force could offer little against the scale of the assault, and so the defense of Prospero unfolded as a series of struggles, each marked by determination, yet overshadowed by the inevitability of its fall. After the long shadow of the Horus Heresy had passed, the structure of the Legion slowly unraveled, and what had once been ordered formations gave way to something more fluid, shaped by unseen forces and shifting will. In the silence that followed the fall of Prospero, a new pattern emerged, one guided not by rigid command, but by the sacred rhythm of 9, a number that carried deep meaning for those who served the changer of the ways. Within this pattern, the Legion settled into 9 distinct cults, each guided by a powerful figure whose authority carried echoes of ancient ranks. And around them gathered circles of sorcerers whose influence stretched through layers of hidden purpose. These groupings formed a living web of intent, where each thread seemed separate, yet all were drawn toward designs too vast to fully grasp. At the heart of their war gatherings moved the thrall bands, small but potent circles of sorcerous power, where a central figure stood among a chosen number of lesser minds, their combined presence amplifying the energies that flowed between them. In these assemblies, the quiet march of Rubric Marines and the heavy tread of Terminators followed the will of their masters, moving with an inevitability that felt both unnatural and precise. These forces did not travel alone, for they were often accompanied by warped auxiliaries and mortal followers drawn from distant worlds, and though remnants of captured war gear sometimes joined their ranks, such duels rarely endured for long, fading as quickly as they were taken. Beyond these shifting hosts, exiles wandered the galaxy, those who had once shaped the Legion's fate with forbidden acts, now cast out yet still bound to its lingering purpose. Each cult drew strength from the worlds it claimed, gathering resources, followers, and subjects for experiments that blurred the line between knowledge and transformation. And though their aims often clashed, their actions formed a larger pattern of unrest that spread quietly across the stars. Rarely did a full cult gather in one place, yet even a fragment of their power could unravel entire systems, leaving confusion and fear in its wake. Through it all, their presence remained unmistakable, marked by ancient symbols and shifting runes, carried upon armor that bore both memory and purpose. The Legion continued its slow, deliberate march through a galaxy that could never fully understand its designs. Within each cult, different paths unfolded, shaped by intent and desire, where some sought raw sorcery, while others moved quietly through hidden networks, guiding events with unseen hands. There were those who pursued knowledge above all else, searching for lost tomes and secrets that could reveal weaknesses not only in their enemies, but within reality itself. Others embraced transformation, reshaping flesh and world alike, turning once stable places into realms that no longer obeyed familiar laws. Some listened to whispers from beyond, piecing together fragments of futures that had not yet come to pass. In these quiet visions, choices were made that would ripple outward, altering events long before they unfolded. Among them walked the exalted sorcerers, beings whose understanding of the arcane had deepened over countless years, their forms often reflecting the strange paths they had taken. Though they viewed battle as a lesser concern, their presence brought a sharp and terrible focus when conflict could not be avoided. Around them moved the scarab occult terminators, once brilliant minds, now reduced to echoes of their former selves, advancing with a calm that felt almost detached from the violence they delivered. The Rubric Marines followed in their wake, silent and obedient, their existence bound to armor that moved without true life, responding only when guided yet stirred by the memory of battle when conflict surrounded them. Nearby, the Tzaangor Beastmen surged forward with a different energy, driven by a hunger for power and recognition, their actions filled with both cunning and cruelty as they sought to rise above their origins. Together, these varied forms created a force that was never truly uniform, yet always aligned toward a shared, shifting purpose, where knowledge, transformation, and manipulation blended into a single, unfolding design. Among the engines of war that followed the Legion, some carried a weight far beyond their physical form, for within them lay the suffering of those who had been bound against their will. The hell brutes moved as towering constructs of rage, their existence sustained by the agony of the warriors sealed within, a fusion of flesh and machine that allowed no escape from endless torment. These creations were not born from willing sacrifice, but from deception and ritual, where those lured by promises of power found themselves drawn into a transformation that could not be undone. Their awareness preserved even as their bodies were reduced and reshaped into something unrecognizable. Once sealed within their iron prisons, they were driven forward by pain alone, finding no relief even in the destruction they unleashed. Elsewhere, other engines drew their strength from darker bargains, As the Legion acquired demon-bound constructs through pacts and sorcery rather than crafting them directly. Among these were the Heldraks, which soared above the battlefield, their metallic forms echoing ancient serpents. Their movements were swift and predatory as they tore through the sky. These creatures had once been something else, their origins lost within a transformation that merged pilot and machine into a single entity, their senses reshaped until nothing remained but the experience of flight and destruction. Within their cores, what little remained of their former selves endured only as a distant presence, overshadowed by the will of the warp entities that now defined them. In their passage, they left devastation both above and below, their presence a reminder of how deeply the boundaries between life, machine, and warp had been broken within the Legion. Across the battlefield, other engines advanced with a different kind of presence, their forms larger and more imposing, carrying within them forces that strained against the limits of containment. The Defilers moved with a grinding inevitability, their many limbs reshaping the ground beneath them, while their weapons unleashed destruction that carried not only physical force, but the influence of bound entities that altered reality itself. Even when these machines were brought low, their end was rarely quiet, as the energies within them burst outward, distorting everything nearby before fading back into the unseen realm from which they had come. Their construction was never simple, for it required delicate and dangerous rituals, where even a single misstep could unravel the minds of those attempting to shape them. The Forge Fiends followed with a more direct fury, their forms resembling massive predators, yet driven by something far more deliberate, their attacks fueled by a fire that burned within their core without end. Each strike they delivered carried fragments of that inner blaze, manifesting as projectiles or searing bursts that tore through anything in their path. These entities were not content within their confines, their nature urging them toward greater freedom, yet that very frustration became a tool, as their rage translated into relentless destruction. Through manipulation and careful planning, the Legion ensured that such engines remained bound to their purpose, even as they strained against it. In this way, the battlefield became a place where machine, demon, and will combined, each element reinforcing the others in a cycle that was both controlled and unstable. Ahead of advancing forces, the Mauler Fiends surged forward, their movements swift despite their size, crashing into defenses with a force that shattered both structure and formation, while their weapons adapted to the needs of each engagement. Some tore through armored lines with focused heat, while others lashed out in wide arcs, scattering infantry in moments of chaotic violence. Behind them gathered formations shaped not only by strength, but by the will of those who led them, where covens and cabals of sorcerers worked together to shape outcomes that extended beyond the immediate clash. In these gatherings, the air itself seemed to shift, as unseen forces bent and twisted in response to their combined intent. The Sekhmet conclaves moved with heavy precision, their steps measured and unyielding, forming a core around which other elements could gather, while the Zungor warriors surged with a more primal energy, driven by instinct and the promise of reward. Their actions loud and immediate compared to the quiet focus of their masters. Among these forces walked the exiles, bound by shared history and lingering purpose, their presence marked by a deep sense of unresolved intent as they continued to pursue goals that had once reshaped the Legion itself. Their actions carried both bitterness and determination, woven together in a way that influenced all who followed them. Through these many forms, the Legion existed not as a single unified force, but as countless fragments moving in parallel, each shaped by its own path, yet still part of a larger design that continued to unfold without end. In its earliest days, the Legion drew its strength from distant origins, shaped by those first taken from Terra, yet everything shifted when they were reunited with their Primarch, and a pact was sealed that changed their fate in ways that could not be undone. From that moment, only a small fraction were spared from the corruption that followed, and the burden of that change lingered within them. As the years of the Great Crusade continued, recruitment became limited to a single world, one that offered few candidates. Yet among them were many who carried the spark of psychic ability, a trait that defined the Legion even as it reduced their overall numbers. This balance between rarity and power shaped their identity, leaving them fewer in number but distinct in nature. In the time that followed, the method by which they maintained their strength became uncertain. There were moments when something unusual was observed, as fallen warriors seemed to return through rituals that drew upon forces beyond the material world. In these acts, the essence of the dead was brought forth and bound once more to a physical form, whether that form had life or not, before the ritual began. Through such means, the Legion endured, its numbers sustained not through growth in the usual sense, but through a cycle that blurred the line between death and continuation, ensuring that even in their altered state, they would persist. In the long shadow of their history, the Thousand Suns endure as something both remembered and misunderstood, their path shaped not only by the choices they made, but by the forces that moved unseen around them. What began as a Legion set apart by knowledge and discipline became, over time, a reflection of the very powers they sought to master, their fate bound tightly to the currents of the warp that had always followed at their side. From the quiet laboratories beneath Terra to the burning ruins of Prospero, their story is marked by moments of brilliance and ruin alike. Each turning point carries a weight of consequence that cannot be undone. The judgment of the Emperor, the wrath of brother legions, and the shifting hand of chaos all left their mark, shaping them into something that no longer fit within the design they had once served. Yet even in their fall, there remains a strange continuity, a purpose that persists beneath the ruin. The dust-filled armor of the Rubric Marines stands in silent ranks, while the sorcerers who guide them continue their search for knowledge, each act of discovery drawing them deeper into the designs they once believed they could control. In this, they have not abandoned what they were, but carried it forward into a form that reflects the cost of their pursuit. So, the Thousand Suns move on, scattered yet unbroken, their presence felt in hidden places and distant wars, where whispers of forbidden lore and flickers of impossible power mark their passing. Whether driven by regret, ambition, or something beyond either, they remain bound to a path that does not end, only shifts and deepens as the galaxy turns and the unseen currents continue to guide them onward.